Okay, so why don't we get started? Good morning, good afternoon, bon matin, bon après-midi, depending where you are calling or joining us from today. My name's Lee. My colleague Alexander Dirksen is also on the line with us here today, and we're going to be joined by our special guest in a few moments. But wanted to get started with today's session on the decolonial mindset. Which is being hosted. Obviously, this session is part of the Youth Powering Community Initiative, which is a year-long initiative that connects and empowers young people who are making positive social or environmental changes in their communities with a free online learning series. So excited that you're joining us today. If this is your first time with us, we've hosted a couple other sessions already, including one last month on specifically around coping with COVID. And this is our first in the official calendar of the series. Alors, bienvenue. Un rappel qu'on va façonner d'une façon fluidement bilingue en anglais et en français. Fait que si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas de participer avec le chat ou en discours en français ou en anglais. Je vais faire mon mieux de faire la traduction et l'interprétation au fur et à mesure de les besoins. If you are Francophone and would prefer to speak in a small group discussion in French or with people who understand French, please indicate that by changing your name by adding a -F at the end. And if you're bilingual, also maybe adding a -B so that I know that I can put people together who can speak in both languages. Un petit rappel avant au commencement que la portion en plein air va être enregistrée. Alors, the plenary sessions where we're all together will be recorded, but not the breakout groups. And a copy of the recording will be made available online afterwards for those who were unable to join us today, or if you wanted to use that for reference at a later date. Aussi, on va partager des diapos sur Google Drive, sur Google Slides, je veux dire, puis je vais partager les liens pour les documents aussi dans le chat. We'll be sharing some documents on Google Drive. Over the course of today's conversation, we'll be sharing links to any of the materials in the chat for everyone to be able to access as well. So with that, I'd like to turn to my colleague, Alexander Dirksen, who's going to share our community agreements in English, and I'll do the same thing in French before we proceed with the content of today's session. Alexander, over to you.
Wonderful, thanks, Lee. Hello, everybody. We'll have a chance for some intros in a little bit, but just to start, such a privilege to be with you all here today. So thanks for making the time. And yeah, as we get started, just a few community agreements to guide our time together. And I think Lee will also just share those as a doc in the chat box as well, just so we can all sort of refer back to them over the course of the session as well. But the agreements, just to read through, are as follows. So we are accountable to working in the spirit of reconciliation and decolonization, and to exploring what this means for each of us. We use people's pronouns. If you haven't done so already, you can also add those in on your name within Zoom as well. All of our experiences, ideas, and intelligences are valuable and welcome. We remember our lived experiences are different and acknowledge that we have different experiences from others. So where possible, we speak from I, and when we do use a we statement, we clarify what we mean by that. We honor stories. So when we hear a story, we're being trusted to hold it, not necessarily to share it, unless explicit permission is given. So taking the lessons and learnings from this time, but keeping some of the personal details that are shared in this virtual space here together today. We do not demand knowledge from others or answers to our questions, but enter into relationship and confirm that someone is the person to ask and is comfortable answering. And we respect their no. And alongside that, particularly for conversations like the one here today, we accept non-closure, knowing that the work is ongoing and lifelong. And then lastly, just the oops and ouch framework. So if as we are very much going to be thinking out loud today together and working through things together, the oops, if you might be saying something and you catch yourself as that may not be landing right, or that's not quite coming out the way that you'd hoped, the oops just is like the acknowledgement that might be the case. And also an ouch if you're feeling as though something has landed for you in a way that wasn't intended. And there'll be a chance to kind of unpack that as well, particularly in the smaller breakout groups. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Lee, who will share the same community agreements en français.
Thank you, Alexander. I've shared a link to the community agreements as well in the chat function. And Alexander, I wonder if you can just monitor the waiting room as I read through the agreements to allow any new participants to join us. Alors, c'est notre responsabilité de travailler dans un esprit de réconciliation et décolonisation et d'explorer que cela signifie pour chaque personne du groupe. Nous engageons à utiliser les pronoms correspondant aux personnes. Si vous désirez qu'on vous désigne par un pronom neutre de point de vue du sexe, s'il vous plaît, nous le mentionner. Toutes nos expériences, idées et informations sont précieuses et bienvenues. Nous n'oublions pas que chaque personne du groupe a un vécu qui est différent que celui que les autres. En disant « je », nous parlons en notre propre nom et nous expliquons ce que nous voulons dire lorsque nous utilisons le pronom « nous ». Nous honorons les histoires. Lorsque nous entendons une histoire, on nous fait confiance que nous la garderons pour nous, sans la partager, à moins d'avoir reçu l'autorisation explicite de le faire. Nous n'exigeons pas que les autres partagent leurs connaissances ou répondent à nos questions, mais que nous entrons en contrat avec et veillons à confirmer que la personne à qui nous adressons est bien celle à qui la question doit être posée et que cette personne est là à l'aise de répondre. Nous respectons son refus aussi. Et aussi, on travaille aussi avec un principe de « oups et oui ». Nous reconnaissons nos erreurs et nous efforçons de les réparer. Nous permettons aux autres de s'exprimer et si nous avons laissé affectés par nos actions ou nos paroles. Alexander, I'm going to turn it back to you to kick us off. Merci pour ça, tout le monde. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Lee. And I will now share, also in the chat box here, just a link to the slide deck for folks that would like to follow along there. Here we are, okay. So just to start, we're going to begin just with a practice of decolonial introductions. And so as we're gathering virtually and there's a lot of new faces on the screen, this idea of decolonial introductions is just an opportunity and a chance for us to get to know each other in a way that goes beyond job titles. So oftentimes we're in situations where we're meeting people for the first time, and it's usually a hello, my name is Alexander and I am, say, program director at Community Knowledge Exchange. And while that, you know, what we do for our work, particularly for those of us in nonprofit work, is, you know, the personal and the professional weave together so closely, it is a small piece of who we are. And so this practice, which is shared to me by some community leaders out here on the West Coast, it's really an opportunity for us to bring some more of ourselves into the space. So, you know, if you're comfortable, of course, this is just an exercise to be sharing a bit more of yourself beyond those job titles. And so in a moment, we'll have a chance to actually use the breakout functionality of Zoom. So you'll have a chance to break off into some smaller groups and connect with each other there. But for just to start, I can just model what this practice looks like. And then we'll have an opportunity for you to break off into some smaller groups and connect with each other in a similar way. So to begin, the first prompt is your fullest name. And so whatever that means for you. So particularly when we talk about you know, being or embodying a more decolonial mindset, it's a recognition that for some folks, they carry sort of an English or colonial name, and they also hold a traditional name. For some folks, they actually have, you know, a nickname that they prefer or that they go by. You know, others, you know, they connect more with maybe a middle name. So this is just an opportunity to kind of share what is your fullest name, what is you know, your preferred name, a little bit about the roots of your name if you have them or know them, and just speaking a little bit to you know, what that means for you as well. Is there a significance or a meaning to your name? So with that, so for myself, Alexander, and for me, my first name comes from my parents, and from what they've told me, equal mix of, they saw strength in the name, but also it sounded like a kind name to them. And so I try to carry those two things with me and sort of embody that as much as I can in terms of my name. Dirksen obviously speaks to the Dutch side of my family, and so the Dutch roots. And I think as we go through this work together, and it's always an interesting way of kind of exploring more of our own identities as well through this process. Next up is pronouns. So for myself, he, him pronouns. The territories you're joining from today. So for myself, I'm joining from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And relationships you hold. This is quite an open-ended prompt, but just, in terms of, again, developing more of a decolonial approach to our lives and our work, it's a recognition, particularly in a time and a place where so much value is placed on the individual, so the individual change maker or the individual leader. It's a recognition that for all of us, we're so much more than just the individual, and our success or our learnings and growth can never be attributed just to us. And so that there's always sort of a community that surrounds us and is involved in our work. So, for myself, and again, this is also a chance to bring others into the space as well. So for myself, some of the relationships I hold include that with my partner, who is Egyptian Australian. And so when we talk about decolonization, has taught me so much about just what that means and how that is experienced by folks, particularly when we talk about migration and movement, and the fact that, colonization and its impacts have been felt around the world. And how do we bring more people into these conversations in these spaces? I think about the relationship I hold with my brother, and our sort of continued exploration and ongoing work around our identities and our ancestry and our roots. And lastly, I think of, maybe some co-conspirators. So for example, Lee, who I have the opportunity to work with on a daily basis as well, and the dialogues that we're able to have, particularly through the work that we do around actively unlearning and relearning and embodying some of these new approaches. So those are just some of the relationships that I hold that I think of when we begin these conversations. And lastly, in what ways does decolonization resonate for you? For some folks that are gathered here today, this could be your first touch point with this. This could be the first time you're starting to think through some of these ideas. And that's okay. We're all at different stages in this work and in this journey. We're all going to be moving at different paces at different times. And I think particularly as we gather at this time, just to name that as we begin these conversations today as well, that a lot of folks are holding a lot, and some of these deeper explorations and inner work might be a bit slower right now as we're moving through this time, and that's okay. So whatever comes to mind for you when you think about this, I think for me, when I think of decolonization, a lot of it is that process of unlearning, of coming to better understand and explore how to be in the world in a way that is more authentic and connected and grounded to place, to people. I reflect upon, chatting with folks back, my family back home, which is a kind of small working class town, and got me thinking particularly around the idea of, around masculinity, and around, part of decolonization for me is getting to a place where, expressing love, more and more, particularly in these times. For me, that's a form of decolonization. So for everybody on the call, it will take different forms and different approaches. And so just to really sit and think with what that means for you. So we'll have a moment in it, or you'll all have a moment after one more set of introductions to have some time just to journal, just to reflect individually on some of those prompts before we head into the breakout groups. So you'll have a chance to do some reflection individually before you share. But before we do that, I would like to, it's a real pleasure to introduce my co-host for this session, who is not only a dear friend and collaborator out here on the West Coast, but somebody I also count as a real mentor, particularly when it comes to these conversations. So with that, I would just like to turn the floor to the co-host for the session, Aslam, who will now introduce himself.
Thanks, Alex. Sorry I'm late, everybody. You wouldn't believe the traffic, you know, from one meeting to the next. I'm joking, it's all on Zoom. So my name is Aslam Bulbulia. So Aslam means to be protected or safeguarded, and it also means to be a witness to faith or to something greater than us. I got the name because when I was born with the umbilical cord around my neck, and my parents weren't sure if I was going to make it or not. And then also in my community, I'm from South Africa, and my community has this tradition of like giving gifts when a child is born. So my parents made these beautiful like little brass baskets that had my name engraved in it and had these pistachio nuts inside. And then the shop that made them got broken into like the night before I was born, and everything was stolen except these little baskets. So they thought like Aslam, to be safe, protected, safeguarded, that felt like a very appropriate name. And then my last name is Bulbulia, and Bulbul is a singing bird, or like a nightingale. So someone in my ancestry must have had this beautiful singing voice that got lost somewhere down the line. But that's my family's name, my father's name, and a little bit about the land that I'm from. So my ancestors from my father's side are third and fourth generation Gujarati traders who came from India before, I think there's a nice term called pre-partition India, to South Africa. And then my mom's family came as indentured labor to work on the sugarcane plantations. So when slavery officially ended, there was still a need for cheap labor, and you know, tales were told of, you know, come to Africa and you'll make lots of money, and all of these promises were made, and the British put a bunch of people on boats once again and took them from India to South Africa. So that's kind of my history. And then obviously my parents and my grandparents and great-grandparents were born and grew up in apartheid South Africa. I was born under apartheid in South Africa. And I moved to unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh lands 3 years ago because my wife is from here. So that leads me to like the relational piece, that like I find myself on this land because my wife, whose dad is from Pakistan and mom is from Malawi, she grew up over here. And we met in Toronto, fell in love, got married in South Africa, lived there for a few years, and then moved out over here. And I'm very grateful for this land. I found that this land has been incredibly nurturing and healing. I often think about like the intention behind the city. And I know that when Johannesburg was founded, it was founded on gold. And that very much drives the mentality of people till today. I think that there's still like a hustle and bustle and like a constant striving for more and more and more, and a lot of wealth. Whereas I found that since moving over here, there's been a lot of beautiful, you know, there's this saying that like matriarchs will choose the chiefs. And I found like a lot of mentorship and beautiful opportunities provided for me for learning and my own growth and development from some very strong women who've played that role in my life since I've moved over here. So I've mentioned my wife, my family. I've got 3 brothers who are all in South Africa, and my parents and all my cousins and aunts and uncles are there. So I'm not used to the like Vancouver loneliness, and I'm grateful that Alex is a friend amongst other friends that I have in the city. I also feel strongly connected to a diasporic community. You know, lots of immigrants over here trying to make sense of what it means to be a settler on stolen land, but also an immigrant on stolen land, and some of the nuances and complexities that arise from those conversations. I'm also very much connected to the people of South Africa in struggles post-apartheid for economic justice that did not follow as quickly as we thought it would after the political freedom that we got in '94. And then also as a Muslim and broadly as a person of faith, I find myself connected to like a global community of people who seek out justice in the name of improvement and connection, and also like broadly trying to seek out what is beyond human in whatever shape or form that might take for you. Yeah, and I think that decolonization for me partly speaks to that last point. I think it's, you know, part of a spiritual journey for me as well to make right with where I am. I first heard the term when I was attending a public lecture at the University of Johannesburg, and this person came and spoke about the 4 epistemicides of the long 16th century and spoke about how the ways of knowing from, you know, Moors in Spain, Jewish people, Black people from Africa, indigenous people in the Americas, and women in Europe through the witch hunts. All these like different groups of people had unique ways of knowing, and over the course of the 16th century, he told the story of how those ways of knowing were destroyed. And just replaced with like a monoculture, like a single way of knowing and seeing the world. And when I heard that for the first time, I thought about that feeling that I had growing up, where I was like between the Muslim world and then this like Christian school that I went to and was being taught to receive like a good education, and that dissonance that I felt between the two. So hearing the word decolonization, I was like, oh yeah, that's why I've always felt myself uncomfortable between these spaces, and recognizing like why some ways of being are privileged over others, and why I can't talk about my faith in the classroom, and why I can't do all of these things. So I think that from that early instance, I think my exposure has been very intellectual, and then moving over here, I've started thinking about it a lot in terms of land. And there's a paper about like decolonization is not a metaphor. And I think that like we need to hold both the like internal decolonial process that we go through, where we try to learn and unlearn, but there's also the very real material process of decolonization, trying to return land to whom it belongs to, and to make sure that the systems, economic and otherwise, are returned to justice and better ways of being. Yeah. Can leave it at that. Thank you so much for the opportunity to introduce myself to all of you.
Thank you. And so with that, we will just have a moment to journal and to reflect. So for each of you, for those that are following along on the slide deck, you'll find on slide 4 is where all of the prompts are. So you can pull that up if you'd like to refer back. We'll have about 5 minutes just to sit with that, just to journal, and then we will actually break off into small groups of 3, and you'll have a chance to share just with 2 others, just briefly, a few reflections based on those prompts. So as you journal, please feel free as well. If you're more comfortable, you can switch your video off as you reflect. And at the top of the clock, we will break off into some smaller groups.
Alexander, I'm going to share just the prompt instructions in French for participants while we do the journaling.
Wonderful, thanks, Lee.
On va prendre quelques minutes, là, juste en période de réflexion personnelle individu, pour parler, on va sous peu, à 3 heures, l'heure de l'Est, on va mettre en petit groupe et vous demander de vous faire une introduction décoloniale comme Alexander et Aslam l'ont fait, par exemple. Alors, on vous invite à réfléchir à votre... dans le diapo, je m'excuse que les diapos ne sont pas disponibles en français, c'est une erreur de ma faute. On va faire la traduction pour les avoir après aussi. Mais de penser à votre nom, ton nom au complet. Qui vous a donné votre nom? Est-ce que vous savez c'est quoi les origines de votre nom? Est-ce que vous avez des petits noms aussi? Si oui, comment tu les as eus? C'est qui l'a donné ton petit nom? C'est ta mère, ton père, un enfant, un ami, frère et sœur? Et aussi, quel est ton nom préféré que vous aimez utiliser? On pensait aussi à réfléchir à nos pronoms, les territoires sur lesquels on se trouve en ce moment. Et on vous demande aussi de réfléchir aussi à des relations on arrive ici comme individu, on amène l'autre monde aussi avec nous dans notre travail et aussi dans ce dialogue aujourd'hui. Et aussi de penser à la dernière question, c'est quoi ça veut dire la décolonisation pour toi, en ce moment, dans ce contexte et à cette place ici. Alors, on a quelques minutes de réflexion à réfléchir et ensuite, je vais faire le travail pour mettre tout le monde en petit groupe. Merci. Okay, Alexander, thanks to the wizardry of Zoom, the breakout rooms are ready. Alors, les chambres de discussion sont prêtes. Alors, are we ready to go into the small groups? Excellent. Okay, so again, the prompts are there. The Google slide notes are in the chat box if you've got the prompts. And Alexander, how much time will we take here? About 15 minutes?
Yeah, about 12 to 15 minutes. So try to keep your remarks to about 4 minutes or so each, just so that everybody has an opportunity to share. And if you have some time after, then you can definitely go a bit deeper with those in the breakout rooms.
Si vous avez besoin d'aide, if you need a hand, please raise your hand in the chat and I'll be happy to come in and help with anything, whether that's tech or to help facilitate the conversation. Alors, on vous envoie dans les petits groupes et on vous revoit dans 12 à 15 minutes.
It's always hard to tell with these Zoom breakout rooms, what the energy was like in the different groups, but maybe people can just give me like little thumbs, like doing okay, feeling good. Yeah, okay. At least get a little bit of a sense of what's going on. Yeah, so Alex and I were talking about the session, and one of the things that we were talking about is like how like decolonization can apply to any moment that we're in. And in any interaction that we're having, an experience that we're having as well. So during this time, I've been thinking a lot about like colonization being a process of disruption and a process of separation. And there's a few ways in which separation occurs, and it's mostly what I see as separation of relationship. So it's a separation of like my relationship with myself. There's like my body, my spirit, my land, and my ancestors. And within each of these, I can say that like the separation occurs in multiple ways. So whether it's through the like introduction of a foreign religion into a space, whether it's through the disposition of land, whether it's through the destruction of land, whether it's through just the experience of trauma that leads to like a disembodied experience. So when we decolonize, part of that is like remembering what it is to reconnect with your body, and like remembering like, oh, actually, yeah, I'm feeling a lot of stress and I carry my stress in my shoulders. So when I feel that shoulder pain, recognizing that that's actually got something to do with my feet and my mental state, my emotional state at the same time. And one of the interesting parts of this time in particular was this like connection with ancestors. So I definitely am one of these people who's not that connected. I mean, my family is one of diaspora and we don't have records. But the most far back record that I have is this photograph that I found of my great grandfather. So that's my mom's dad. And within my whole extended network, like that's the like farthest back that we can trace things. And I've known that this picture existed, and for some reason I just looked at it over the last week, and I noticed that like in the little description of who he was, it mentions that he was a member of the anti-malaria committee and a member of the anti-influenza committee in 1918. And it struck a few things for me. So the one is that like every single one of my ancestors had to have outlived whatever plague or epidemic faced their community in order for me to be here. So the amount of resilience that must have taken, now it's real to us. Like now we can imagine what a plague, what an infestation would have been like, because we're experiencing it. Granted, we're experiencing it with like all the privileges of the 21st century, but it makes me think about like, when Indigenous people in this land were exposed to various diseases, and how that must have like completely shaped and reshaped society. And then for my family, like they lived through this. And every single ancestor that I had lived through it. And I think it gives me hope that like, and we will live through it as well. It will shape things, it will change things, but we will live through it. But this particular piece of connecting with my ancestor and the fact that he sat on these committees, it made me think about what is my role during this time, and how am I supposed to be showing up, and how can I show up? And we know that privileges accrue from generation to generation. So the fact that my great-grandfather was on this committee meant that he had a certain level of access to social capital, perhaps financial capital. He was educated in certain ways, and he would have passed that on to his children, and they would have perhaps been able to like add to it and pass it on to their children, who might have added to it and then passed it on to me. So everything that I know and how I respond in this time was actually built up many generations in the making. So what is my role during this time? And I found myself gravitating towards organizing, gravitating towards helping to support people in my community, which is different from a lot of other folks who find themselves during this time without work, or trying to feed themselves and sustain their families at a more basic level. And this is just to like, for me, it was that reminder that that this is not just like coincidental, that I am responding in this way, that actually it's the result of many generations of work that have come into me being this way. And that also inspires me to think about like, what is the work that I'm doing that is going to change the way that generations from now, hopefully if I have direct descendants or indirect descendants through the people that I'm connected with, how they show up in the world when the next crisis hits, or the next plague happens, or the next virus infestation takes over. Yeah, and I think it seems a little bit disjointed a little bit in my head, but I think that's the reflection that I've been having over the last week. And like, what does it mean to decolonize this moment? I think it's about me reconnecting with my spiritual practices as a way of like grounding myself, a way of reconnecting with my body to know where is it in my body that I'm feeling things? What is the wisdom of my body telling me? Do I need to be working less? Do I need to be working more? Do I need to be feeding myself better? Like, what are the signals being given to me? How do I reconnect my relationship with land? And I think most of us will know, like being stuck inside a house, like all of a sudden we're like, oh, wow, I actually need to be connected with land. I need to be going for walks. I need to be out in nature in the way that we sometimes dichotomize like nature versus the city. But even the city is stewarded land. It's stewarded in a certain direction towards development and economic productivity. But that land is stewarded, and we have a relationship and a connection with it that this particular moment in time is reminding us of. And then also that like connection with ancestors, to think about like the fact that every single one of our ancestors have lived through this or something similar, and that we will hopefully be able to do the same and pass the learnings on to those who come after us. So yeah, I think that's kind of what my reflections were at this time, and I wanted to pass over to Alex to share some of his reflections.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so I think, you know, when we looked to host this session today, we had a really interesting and rich conversation about, you know, is this the time to be hosting this? And does it make sense? Because of how much everybody's holding right now. And, you know, we thought that, yes, actually, like these conversations are needed now more than ever. And I think just to build upon like the beautiful reflections that Assam has shared is that, you know, it's this moment of global pause where all of our systems are taking a chance to breathe. And, you know, there's so much suffering, and there's so much pain in these times. But there's also, I think, as we look to the steps that we're going to take forward from this, how can we be doing this in a way that is much more intentional and grounded and thoughtful, inclusive, equitable, all of those things. And I think it starts with some of these things that we're talking about here today. You know, taking the time in our days to be unlearning and building those deeper connections with each other, with the land that we're on, all of those things. You know, during these times, I've found myself, you know, definitely connecting more with, you know, the world around me. You know, ancestors of perhaps a different kind of, you know, spending more time, you know, just leaning up against a tree and just feeling the strength and the rootedness that comes from those trees in the neighborhood. You know, those sorts of practices and exercises connect me much more to where I am. And I think in a time and place where we are so used to this capitalist colonial rush of moving about our days, this is a chance for us to experience something different. And I think one of the biggest barriers, I think, to us stepping forward into different futures is the inability to see it. And, you know, for myself, as I am on my own journey of decolonization as a Métis man, I'm finding this time is so perfect to be actually experiencing what those different ways of being are. And I hope that we can carry some of that with us in terms of our next steps from here. And that we can remember what it means to be out and hearing the birds and leaning up against a tree. And they seem like small things, but this is where we start to shift and change how we engage with each other. And so, in terms of our time here together today, talking about a decolonial mindset, for me, this is where it all starts, is in this moment of pause, in this moment of reflection, how are we thinking through how we connect with each other in the world, and how can we bring some of that different energy forward. And with that, we'd like to give you a chance actually now to do some reflections. And so we have, for those following along in the slide deck, slide 7, it's the head, hearts, and hands prompt, which you might have experienced before. But this is just, so we'll begin with just a bit of a time just to journal. And then from there, we'll actually just have a chance to connect with each other around some of these prompts. So we'll have just 10 minutes to start, just to journal, and then we'll shift into some smaller groups. But you'll find the prompts there. So, where's your mind being drawn as you reflect on this conversation? What's your body telling you right now? That's another, to Aslan's point as well, just, where are you carrying things in your body? And I think, moving beyond the head and into the full body experience. And then what's next? What are you sort of sitting with as seeds that are being planted for next steps? So, 10 minutes or so just to journal independently, and then we'll have a chance for you to connect as a broader group around some of these ideas and themes.
Thanks, Alexander. I'll just share maybe the reflective prompts in French. And if you're, again, as Alexander said earlier, if you're journaling or thinking, if you feel free to turn off the video and make sure you're muted if that feels more comfortable for you, if you're sort of head down taking notes somewhere. Alors, avant qu'on résume un dialogue encore en paire, dans un groupe de 2 ou 3, on pense à réfléchir un peu à ce que Alexander et Aslam ont partagé dans ce moment ici. C'est quoi que ça veut dire d'avoir une mentalité décoloniale? Et en anglais, on dit head, heart and hands, alors la tête, le cœur et les mains. Si on pense dans la tête, où tu penses présentement dans votre tête, lorsqu'on pense à réfléchir sur ce dialogue? Est-ce qu'il y a des questions que vous tenez pour une exploration plus approfondie? Et aussi, Aslam a parlé plutôt de vraiment écouter à votre corps. Qu'est-ce qui arrive quand on a une douleur ou on tient le stress peut-être dans nos épaules ou moi, surtout dans la bédaine des fois. Alors, comment on se sent physiquement en ce moment? Est-ce qu'il y a des choses qui changent en termes de physiquement dans votre corps que vous sentez au cours de notre temps ensemble et aussi peut-être encore plus que ça? Et y penser aussi, c'est quoi qui est les prochaines étapes pour toi? Alors, qu'est-ce que vous sommez à ce qu'on continue ce dialogue-là et ce travail-là de décoloniser nos pratiques, soit individuelles ou aussi en groupe, en collectivité? Alors, on va laisser quelques minutes pour la réflexion. Ensuite, on va retourner en petit groupe pour une discussion un peu plus approfondie. Merci.
All right, everyone. So just in another minute or so, we'll be splitting you into just some smaller groups just to chat amongst yourselves for just about 10 minutes or so. And then we're going to hold some time to come back together as a large group, being that it's a smaller large group. We can, oh, there we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Just waiting for a few more folks to join us.
Okay, everyone's out of the breakouts, Alexander, so.
Wonderful. Okay. I will turn the floor back to Aslam to guide us through just a bit of a chance for all of us to come together and share some dialogue. We've had a few smaller conversations over the course of our time together, but this will be a nice chance just for us to all to connect as a bigger group.
Yeah, I know one familiar name over here, so I might ask Jessica to share some reflections. And maybe while she does that, I can ask everybody else if they're comfortable sharing to use the raise hand feature. I'm just curious to hear. It's so strange to like drop into a call and like not have that connection and not be in your little discussion groups or even sense what the energy of the discussion groups is. I'd love to just hear a little bit about what's coming up for folks.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Aslam. I think in our groups we talked a little bit about I think how we're feeling in our bodies and that kind of being dependent on the weather and our ability to, you know, go outside or to see sun and to move, and kind of feeling sluggish as well and spending a lot of time in bed and on the couch. And then I think more in terms of the heart and the head, I think we also talked about like seeing how disproportionately I think different people are being impacted by COVID, and I think like looking at how there's, you know, sometimes a lack of data collected on you know, who's being infected and whether that's along racial lines or social economic lines, and even that being like a colonial tool and a way of measuring, but also one that potentially has an opportunity to perpetuate like policy change, and but also I think calls like this moment as a place for transformation. Like it's a painful moment and one that's forcing us, I think, in many ways to stop and to pause and to reflect, but also I think potentially dream about how large scale systems can change as well, and figuring out how, you know, this might be a place to advance conversations around a universal basic income or other social support networks that don't necessarily divide us but bring us together and help create a better place to live and a stronger sense of community. Anyone else from my group want to jump in? I feel like there was a lot that we talked about, but maybe not enough time to share it all.
No, that was terrific. I thought you did an excellent job. Thanks.
I'll touch really quickly. I think we also talked about the importance to connecting to people, and how even right now in our small groups, how it's almost reviving to talk to new people and do what almost we would do on a daily basis, and just to share ideas, how that could be really refreshing and energizing as well.
Yeah, I don't know how many other extroverts are suffering during this time, but I'm feeling the impacts for sure. And yeah, I think what Jessica was saying, that sometimes it does feel like there's these, the disproportionate impact. And I think that the tool of measurement is often seen as like a colonial thing or like a Western or imperial thing. And I think part of the decolonizing is like to try and think about like what tools are useful in the moment. The first time I heard the term decolonization, it was described that like it's not just about getting rid of all of this voice that used to be dominant, but it's about like opening up that room and making sure that all of the voices have equal space to share and to learn and to contribute. And quite often, I think we feel a lot of like reactivity and defensiveness when people think like, oh no, they're going to take away our stuff. It's not about like taking away, but it's about adding to and creating space for more voices. Any other groups? I don't see any raised hands. I don't know if that's just like my Zoom features or.
I think there's something, the Zoom features have shifted, I think, since the settings. So maybe if someone want to use the yes thumbs up or the yes thing, if you have something you'd like to share, we can use that instead of the raised hand, because the raised hand seems to have disappeared.
Or you can just give a little wave, that works too.
Do you want me to jump in? I raised my hand or waved or something. I'm not sure if I'm going to answer the actual question, but we had a lovely conversation in our room about, we were a little bit, at least myself and one other person was a little bit worried and scared to join this conversation, but we knew how important it is. And that the language that, we've been presented with and just the opportunity to talk with each other has really given us some hopefulness and some positive sort of energy around some of the frustration and sadness and concern that we have about what's happening and the disproportion of how people are impacted. So yeah, that's something that I think came out of my room for me.
Thank you.
Well, Aslam and Alexander, I think if anyone else wanted to chime in, I think there's something I've learned too in terms of is being comfortable with silence. And that's okay in terms of decolonizing practices sometimes, and just thinking of just sitting with that sometimes and not having to fill that space as I fill that space and invite that back to you after a little bit of silence. But wondered if there were anything else you guys wanted to share as we come towards the top of the clock and the end of our time together.
Oh, Karen, yeah.
Yeah, I just think that one of the things that was really interesting in our chat was like kind of discussing the tension between, and I think we're all feeling this a lot, like immediate needs in terms of like my comfort, my safety, my mental health. Like all three of us agreed we've been tensing our jaws like full time, all the time, and I have no idea how to stop. And the signals my body is giving me is like, go hug somebody, and I can't. So sort of balancing those like immediate needs and personal level stuff with the like the stuff that's going on in my head, which is like at a higher level and is like, okay, a crisis is like times of upheaval and are also times of change. And so if we're not, aware and participating in the change, it might not, like it could go just as easily in a different direction that kind of scares me. So yeah, it's like I know that it's important to be really engaged and to be like connecting and doing all this community building, but it's also like on a single person level, very difficult to do that when you are not physically able to connect. So just like, yeah, not a new theme, but an interesting like new reflection on it for me.
Thank you.
I can speak for our group as well. We had some really interesting conversations about Yeah, well, we reflected a lot on the activity and the role that decolonization plays in our lives, but kind of what I want to bring forward is how we discussed the impact of these times on our families and how it's really been challenging to not be close to our families and to not be able to hug them. Like for me personally, like my partner, unfortunately, like his grandma passed away from COVID, and she was from the UK, and it was really challenging, like not feeling like at odds with being able to hug him. And well, I can hug him because he's my partner, but his mom, who lives by herself, we actually ended up breaking COVID protocols to go over there and pick her up and bring her to our home because we were worried about leaving her alone through those times. And but it's challenging to have to face that adversity in these times and not be able to connect with our families. Another thing but a blessing that we talked about that we've been in, and this is also drawing from what you were mentioning, Alexander, about like connecting with nature, is that these kind of slowed down times have allowed us all to kind of go out and really connect with the nature around our neighborhoods and go for walks and slow down and see. For me, I've been noticing a lot of the bees that are coming out. That's always my passion. I love bees. And noticing all the different flowers that are in bloom, when typically at this time of year, since I work in a garden, I'm usually hustling and bustling. So I've been really grateful for that slowing down time. And I know the rest of my group members were grateful for that as well.
Thank you for sharing. We have just a few more minutes left, so I think I will turn to Aslam just for any closing reflections or thoughts as we bring our time together to a close.
Yeah, I think just the last thing that Marika shared reminded me of, like, there's a verse in the Quran, that like with hardship comes ease. And like it's so intertwined, and sometimes it's so difficult to recognize or to see or to and even to like hold that complexity of what that is, that like we can be feeling these two very contradictory things at the same time, and that's okay, and that's part of like what it is to be human, I think, and to be okay with that and not hold ourselves to these like impossible standards of a single way of being, but actually allow for the multiplicities that I think a decolonial mindset also welcomes us to embrace. And also, yeah, trusting our bodies and listening to that and trying to hold the complexity of trying to care for myself, but also being really fascinated and interested and trying to bring these like big systems changes in. So again, these complexities that we try to hold together, despite the apparent contradictions that we see from the outside. Yeah, but that's my only reflection, is gratitude for sharing the space digitally, the opportunity to do so and connect with all of you and hear some of your voices and see some faces. Thank you for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, as always, and thank you all for making time, for just bringing your full selves into this space and into these conversations, and just wishing you and your loved ones just to be healthy and well, and just take care. And we'll hopefully see many of you back here again next month for the next session. But until then, go and enjoy the bees and the trees and a bit of sunshine, and take care, and thanks again.
Merci tout le monde d'être là avec nous aujourd'hui. Bonne fin de journée. On se revoit avec notre prochaine session le mois prochain. J'ai partagé les liens pour le sondage et aussi les prochaines sessions dans le chat. Merci beaucoup. Bonjour. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.